Trust is one of the most fragile things in any relationship. It takes time to build, consistency to maintain, and understanding to strengthen. But the most painful truth about trust is this: it can break in seconds. One moment, everything feels safe, stable, and connected. And the next moment, a single action, a single misunderstanding, or a single mistake can shake the entire foundation of a relationship. And once trust is broken, nothing feels the same again. Even if people stay together, even if they continue talking, even if the relationship continues on the surface, something changes internally. Doubt enters the mind, overthinking starts, emotional distance grows, and the feeling of safety slowly disappears. But here is something most people don't understand: trust breaking is not always the end. It feels like an end because it hits emotionally very hard, but in many cases, trust can be rebuilt. Not instantly, not easily, but slowly, through consistent emotional effort and behavioral change. The real problem is not that trust breaks. The real problem is that most people don't know how to rebuild it correctly. So let's go deep into understanding trust, how it breaks, and most importantly, how it can be fixed. Trust does not break because of one big moment only. In reality, trust often breaks because of accumulation. Small misunderstandings, small lies, small inconsistencies, and small emotional disappointments build up over time. And then one final event becomes the trigger that breaks everything emotionally. This is why sometimes people say it was just one thing, but internally, there were many unspoken things leading up to it. Trust is like emotional glass. It looks strong, but it is sensitive. And once cracks begin to form, even small pressure can cause it to break. Now let's understand why trust feels so painful when it breaks. Because trust is not just belief in another person. Trust is emotional safety. It is the feeling that you are secure, understood, and not emotionally threatened in a relationship. When trust breaks, that emotional safety disappears, and the brain reacts to that loss as a threat. That is why people feel anxiety, overthinking, emotional pain, and confusion after trust issues. It is not just emotional disappointment, it is a nervous system response. Now let's go deeper into how trust actually breaks. One of the biggest causes is dishonesty. Even small lies can damage trust, because trust is built on consistency between words and reality. When words and actions don't match, the brain starts questioning everything. Another cause is hidden behavior. When something important is not communicated clearly, the mind fills the gap with assumptions. And assumptions often lean toward fear instead of trust. Another cause is emotional inconsistency. When someone is caring one day and distant the next without explanation, it creates emotional confusion. And confusion slowly turns into doubt. And sometimes trust breaks not because of betrayal, but because of unmet expectations that were never communicated properly. Now let's understand something very important. Trust is not just about the other person's actions. It is also about perception. Two people can experience the same situation differently. One may see it as harmless, the other may see it as betrayal, and both experiences feel real to them. That is why communication plays a major role in trust. Now let's talk about what happens after trust breaks. The first stage is shock. The mind refuses to accept reality immediately. Then comes emotional pain. Then overthinking begins. You start replaying conversations, analyzing behavior, questioning intentions, and trying to understand what went wrong. This phase is extremely mentally exhausting because the brain is trying to restore emotional stability. Then comes the doubt phase. Even small actions of the other person feel suspicious. Even normal behavior feels questionable. And emotional distance increases. At this point, many relationships either break or enter a cycle of repeated arguments. But this is where the possibility of repair begins, because trust can only be rebuilt if both people are willing to actively work on it. Now let's understand how trust can actually be fixed. The first step is complete honesty. Not partial honesty. Not selective truth. Full transparency. Because trust cannot be rebuilt on hidden information. If something is left unspoken, doubt will continue to grow in the background. Honesty is not just about saying what happened. It is about being open even when it is uncomfortable. The second step is accountability. This is where most people fail. Instead of accepting responsibility, they justify, defend, or minimize their actions. But accountability is what creates emotional safety again. When someone genuinely accepts what they did without shifting blame, it creates a signal that change is possible. The third step is consistent behavior change. Trust is not rebuilt through words. It is rebuilt through repeated actions over time. One apology cannot fix broken trust. Only consistency can. If someone was unreliable before, they need to become reliable consistently. If someone was dishonest before, they need to become transparent consistently. If someone was emotionally distant before, they need to become emotionally present consistently. Because trust is rebuilt through patterns, not promises. Now let's talk about patience. One of the hardest parts of rebuilding trust is time. The person who broke trust may want quick forgiveness, but the person who is hurt needs time to feel safe again. And both sides must understand this difference. Healing trust is not a fast process. It requires emotional patience, because the mind does not forget pain instantly, even if forgiveness is given. Now let's go deeper into emotional triggers. After trust is broken, certain words, actions, or situations can trigger emotional reactions. Even if the current situation is harmless, the brain connects it to past pain. For example, a delayed reply might trigger anxiety. A change in tone might trigger suspicion. A small mistake might trigger overthinking. This is normal, but it needs awareness. Because without awareness, triggers control reactions. And controlled reactions create more damage. So part of rebuilding trust is learning to recognize triggers and respond calmly instead of reacting emotionally. Now let's talk about communication during healing. Communication becomes extremely important after trust issues, but it must change in style. Instead of defensive communication, there needs to be open communication. Instead of accusations, there needs to be expression of feelings. For example, instead of saying, "You always lie," a healthier approach is, "I felt hurt and insecure when this happened, and I need clarity." This shifts communication from blame to understanding. Now let's understand something very important. Rebuilding trust does not mean forgetting the past. Many people think healing means pretending nothing happened, but real healing means acknowledging the past without letting it control the present. You remember what happened, but you do not relive it emotionally every day. Now let's talk about boundaries. After trust is broken, boundaries become necessary. Boundaries are not punishment, they are structure. They help create emotional safety again. For example, agreeing on transparency, clear communication, or certain behaviors that help rebuild confidence. Boundaries create clarity, and clarity reduces doubt. Now let's go deeper into emotional self-healing. It is important to understand that rebuilding trust is not only the responsibility of the person who broke it. The person who is hurt also needs emotional healing. Because without healing, even consistent behavior may not feel enough. Healing means reducing overthinking, managing emotional triggers, and slowly rebuilding internal safety. Now let's talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. Forgiveness does not mean trust is immediately restored. Forgiveness means releasing emotional resentment. Trust still needs to be rebuilt separately. You can forgive someone but still need time to trust them again. Now let's come to the most important realization. Trust is not rebuilt through perfection. It is rebuilt through consistency after imperfection. It is about showing up correctly again and again until emotional safety is restored. One mistake breaks trust, but many consistent actions can slowly repair it, but only if both people are willing to participate in that process. Because trust repair is not one-sided. It requires effort from both emotional understanding and behavioral change. At the end, trust is fragile, but not impossible to repair. And when rebuilt properly, it can sometimes become even stronger than before because it is now based on awareness, honesty, and emotional maturity instead of assumption. So yes, trust breaks in seconds. But if you understand it deeply, respect the process, and rebuild it correctly, it can also be fixed for a lifetime.